Hey folks, I'm excited to share some stories with you today that I've written myself. Whether you're a long-time follower or just joining us, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these tales. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you're new here. Let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. I joined a dark web community that can predict deaths. I never considered myself one to believe in the supernatural or the dark underbelly of the internet. Sure, I read the occasional ghost story and chuckled at conspiracy theories, but they were all just stories, right? That changed when I got the invitation. It was a typical Thursday night. I was scrolling through Reddit, jumping from all creepy to all unresolved mysteries, looking for something to kill time. That's when I got the DM. A user named Seeker of Truth, 1998, sent me a message, inviting me to a private dark web community. The message was brief and cryptic. I've been watching your posts. I think you'd be interested in something special. Here's the link. Redacted. Password, Memento Mori. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some kind of elaborate joke, but curiosity got the best of me. I downloaded Tor, followed the instructions, and entered the password. The website was stark and minimalist, with a simple black background and white text. The title read, The Harbinger Society. It boasted about being able to predict the deaths of anyone with eerie accuracy. The community had a strict vetting process, and I had to fill out a detailed form about myself. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I typed in my details, but I pressed on. It was probably some ARG, alternate reality game, I told myself. 2 days later, I received an acceptance email. I was in. The forum was unlike anything I had seen before. Threads were categorized by death predictions, natural causes, accidents, suicides, murders, and other. The other section was particularly disturbing, filled with accounts of bizarre and unexplainable deaths. I started lurking, reading post after post. People claimed to have received predictions about their loved ones, and every single one of them came true. There were timestamps, photos, even videos in some cases. It was unsettling, but my logical brain kept trying to debunk it. It was all too elaborate to be real, right? Then one night, I stumbled upon a thread titled The Counting Clock. The OP, original poster, described a peculiar occurrence. After joining the Harbinger Society, they noticed a digital clock on their desktop that they hadn't installed. It counted down to the exact moment of their predicted death. I brushed it off until the next morning when I turned on my computer. There it was, a small digital clock in the bottom right corner of my screen. It read, 14 days, 10 hours, 23 minutes. I tried everything to remove it. Antivirus scans, malware removals, even a full system wipe. Nothing worked. The clock was persistent. I returned to the forum, hoping for answers. Most responses were vague or unhelpful, but one stood out. Embrace it. Prepare for what's coming. You can't escape fate. The next few days were a blur. I stopped going to work, ignored my friends and family. I became obsessed with the clock. Every tick, every second closer to something. The posts on the forum became darker. People talked about seeing figures, shadows that stalked them. They described waking up with marks on their bodies, symbols that looked ancient and sinister. One user, Death Awaits You, posted about an encounter with a hooded figure. They claimed it whispered their exact time of death before vanishing. The next day, their account was deleted. No explanation. Just gone. As my countdown reached the 10-day mark, I started experiencing things I couldn't explain. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find scratches on my arms, deep and painful. My house, always quiet, was filled with strange noises, whispers, footsteps, doors creaking open and shut on their own. One night, I decided to document everything. I set up cameras around my house, determined to catch whatever was haunting me. The footage was terrifying. Shadows moved on their own. Objects fell without cause. And worst of all, there was a figure. It appeared in every frame, always in the background, watching. My mental state deteriorated. Sleep was impossible. I felt eyes on me constantly, even in the shower, when I closed my eyes to wash my face. The sensation of fingers brushing against my skin, cold and bony, was too real. I couldn't escape it. On the 5th night, before my countdown hit 0, I woke up to find my bedroom door ajar. I always locked it. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and hooded, just as described by others. It didn't move, just stood there, breathing heavily. The sound was a raspy, deathly rattle. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away. When I opened them, it was gone, but the sense of dread lingered. I tried to leave my house, but every attempt was thwarted. My car wouldn't start. The power went out. My phone stopped working. It was as if the house itself had become my prison. The final night before the countdown hit 0 was the worst. The clock read 24 hours, 00 minutes, 00 seconds. The air was thick with an oppressive presence. The whispers grew louder, more coherent. They spoke of my death, describing it in graphic detail. My heart pounded and my mind raced. I knew I had to get out to escape whatever fate awaited me. I packed a bag and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away. As I drove down the deserted highway, the car's radio turned on by itself. Static at first, then a voice. It was the same raspy, deathly rattle I heard from the figure. "You can't run from death." The car's engine sputtered and died. I was stranded, alone. The clock on my phone, the same countdown, hit 0. I sat there, in the darkness, waiting. I saw the figure again, standing in the distance, getting closer. The last thing I remember was the sound of my own screams, drowned out by the static and the raspy, deathly whispering, "Embrace it." And then, darkness. That's where my memory ends. I woke up in a hospital bed, hooked to machines. The doctors said I had been found on the side of the road, unconscious. No one could explain how I got there or what happened. I left the hospital, trying to piece together the events. My computer, my phone, everything related to the Harbinger Society was gone, wiped clean. I returned to the forum, but it had vanished. No trace of it ever existing. I'm sharing this here because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. If anyone else has seen the hooded figure or the counting clock. I need to know I'm not alone in this nightmare. Please, if you've seen it too, if you've experienced the Harbinger Society, share your story. We need to find out what's happening before it's too late. After sharing my story on Reddit, I was overwhelmed with responses. Many were skeptical, calling it an elaborate hoax or a cry for attention. But among the doubters were a few who claimed to have had similar experiences. They spoke of their own encounters with the Harbinger Society, each tale more chilling than the last. One user, Silent Witness 99, described finding the same digital clock on their screen after joining the society. They tried to ignore it, but as the countdown neared 0, their life turned into a waking nightmare. They were plagued by hallucinations, strange noises, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Like me, they tried to escape, but fate seemed inescapable. Their story ended abruptly with a simple message: "The clock is at 0. Pray for me." Another user, Eternal Watcher, provided more disturbing details. They claimed the society wasn't just predicting deaths, it was orchestrating them. They believed the hooded figures were agents of some ancient, malevolent force. According to them, the society was a cult, feeding off fear and death. They warned that once you were marked, there was no escape. Their final post was a grainy video showing their countdown reaching 0. The screen went black, and they never posted again. I was horrified, but also driven by a need to uncover the truth. I decided to dig deeper, starting with the original message from Seeker of Truth, 1998. Their account was still active, so I sent them a message, pleading for answers. Days passed with no response. Just when I was about to give up, a reply came through. "You seek the truth, but the truth is dangerous. They are watching. Trust no one. If you want to understand, find the old graveyard on the outskirts of town. Midnight. Come alone." My rational mind screamed that it was a trap, but I was too far gone to turn back. The sense of dread was constant now, the shadows in my house more oppressive. I knew I had to follow this lead, no matter how dangerous it seemed. The graveyard was ancient, overgrown with weeds and forgotten by time. At midnight, it was shrouded in fog, the moon casting eerie shadows over the crumbling tombstones. I arrived early, hiding behind a large, decrepit mausoleum. As the minutes ticked by, I felt the cold seep into my bones, but I didn't move. At the stroke of midnight, I heard footsteps. A figure emerged from the fog, hooded and cloaked in darkness. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay hidden. The figure stopped at a particular gravestone, knelt down, and began to chant in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew colder, and I felt an unseen force pressing down on me. The chanting stopped abruptly. The figure stood up and turned in my direction, as if sensing my presence. Panic surged through me, and I almost bolted, but then I saw it wasn't the same hooded figure from my house. This one was smaller, almost frail. They pulled back their hood, revealing an elderly woman with piercing eyes. "You can come out," she called softly, her voice trembling with age but steady. "I know you're there." I stepped out from behind the mausoleum, my legs shaking. She studied me for a moment, then gestured for me to come closer. Reluctantly, I obeyed. "You must have many questions," she said, "but first, you need to know that you're in grave danger. The Harbinger Society is not what it seems." I nodded, barely able to speak. "What is it? Why is this happening to me?" She sighed, looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone or something to appear. "The society is ancient, older than any of us can comprehend. It was founded by a cult dedicated to a deity of death. They believe they can control fate, predicting and even causing death to appease their god." "Why me?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "They target those who are curious, those who seek the unknown. You've been marked by their rituals, and now they are watching you. The clock, the hooded figures, they are all part of their control." I felt a chill run down my spine. How do I stop it? How do I escape? She shook her head slowly. "There is no escape once you've been marked, but there may be a way to fight back. You must find the society's leader, the high priest. Only by confronting him can you hope to break the curse. Where do I find him? I asked, clutching at the slim hope she offered. He hides in the shadows, but there is a place. An old mansion on the edge of town. It's said to be their headquarters, but be warned, it's heavily guarded, and the path is fraught with danger. Before I could ask more, a rustling noise came from the darkness. The woman's eyes widened in fear. They're here. You must go, now. Without another word, she turned and vanished into the fog. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed by fear, before running back to my car. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with everything she had told me. When I finally reached my house, I locked every door and window, feeling the oppressive presence more than ever. The clock on my screen now read 7 days, 4 hours, 56 minutes. I knew I had little time. The mansion was my only lead, my only hope of breaking free from this nightmare. But I was terrified. What if I failed? What if I ended up like the others? As I lay in bed, trying to calm my racing heart, I heard a whisper in the darkness. Embrace it. The figure was there again, standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I closed my eyes, willing it to disappear, but the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. Embrace it. Sleep was impossible. The shadows in my room seemed to move, twisting into grotesque shapes. I knew then that I was running out of time, and the real horror was only just beginning. Sleep deprived and terrified, I spent the next few days preparing for my confrontation with the Harbinger Society. I knew I had to find the mansion the old woman mentioned, but it wasn't on any map. I scoured the internet, looking for any clue, any reference to this mysterious place. Finally, in a dusty corner of a local history forum, I found it. The mansion, known as Blackwood Manor, had a dark reputation. It was abandoned decades ago after a series of gruesome murders. The townsfolk whispered that it was cursed, and no one dared to go near it. The perfect hiding place for a death cult. With the clock ticking down to 3 days, 12 hours, 10 minutes, I knew I had to act fast. I packed a bag with essentials, flashlight, batteries, a knife, and my phone. I also brought the camera equipment from before, hoping to document everything in case I didn't make it back. The drive to Blackwood Manor was eerie. The road was long and winding, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to close in on me. The air grew colder as I approached, and the sky darkened with ominous clouds. It felt like the world itself was warning me to turn back, but I couldn't. This was my only chance. The mansion loomed at the end of a narrow dirt road, its Gothic architecture twisted and decayed. Vines and ivy covered its walls, and the windows were dark, like soulless eyes watching my every move. I parked the car a safe distance away and approached on foot, every crunch of leaves under my boots sending shivers down my spine. The front door was ajar, creaking open with a gentle push. The inside was worse than I imagined. Cobwebs everywhere, furniture draped in white sheets, and an overwhelming smell of mold and decay. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The interior was a labyrinth of rooms and hallways, each more unsettling than the last. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, and I found remnants of old rituals, burnt candles, animal bones, and tattered books in languages I couldn't understand. The atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with the weight of countless deaths. As I ventured deeper into the mansion, I began to hear faint whispers, the same raspy, deathly voices that haunted my dreams. They grew louder, guiding me towards the basement. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I pressed on, determined to end this nightmare. The basement door was massive, reinforced with iron bars. It took all my strength to push it open. The air inside was freezing, and the darkness seemed alive, shifting and writhing around me. I descended the creaky wooden stairs, my flashlight flickering as if struggling to stay alive. At the bottom, I found a large circular chamber lit by dozens of black candles. In the center was an altar, and standing before it was the high priest, cloaked in darkness. His hood was down, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. "So, you've come," he said, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the chamber. "You are braver than most." I gripped the knife in my hand, trying to steady my nerves. "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" He smiled, a grotesque grin that sent chills down my spine. "We serve the Harbinger, the keeper of death. We predict, we orchestrate, we feed. Your fear, your despair, it strengthens us." "You're insane," I spat, my voice trembling. "I won't let you take me." He laughed, a sound that reverberated off the stone walls. "You have no choice. The moment you joined our community, you were marked. Your fate is sealed." Desperation took over. I lunged at him with the knife, but he was quicker. He grabbed my wrist with a strength that belied his frail appearance and twisted it until I dropped the blade. I fell to my knees, the weight of defeat crushing me. "Embrace it," he whispered, leaning down so his breath was hot on my face. "Accept your fate." I closed my eyes, feeling tears stream down my face. This was it. This was the end. But then, through the haze of fear and despair, I remembered the old woman's words. Confront him. Fight back. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed him away and grabbed the knife again. Before he could react, I plunged it into his chest. He gasped, eyes wide with shock and pain, before collapsing to the ground. The whispers grew deafening, the shadows closing in around me. I stumbled back, expecting the worst, but the whispers began to fade. The shadows receded, and the air grew warmer. The clock on my phone blinked out, replaced by the normal time. I had done it. I had broken the curse, but the relief was short-lived. As I made my way out of the mansion, I realized the true horror wasn't over. The Harbinger Society was vast, its members hidden everywhere. They would come for me, to avenge their leader, to reclaim their power. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. I couldn't return to my old life, not now. I had to disappear, to stay one step ahead of them. Back at my house, I packed a few essentials and left, not knowing where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The shadows were still there, lurking at the edges of my vision, but I was determined to survive. I'm writing this from a motel room, far from home. The clock is gone, but the fear remains. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from the Harbinger Society. Curiosity can be deadly, and some truths are better left buried. The real horror isn't in the prediction of death. It's in knowing that death is watching, waiting, and no matter how far you run, you can never truly escape. Life on the run was grueling. I moved from town to town, never staying in one place for more than a few days. Paranoia became my constant companion. Every stranger was a potential threat. Every unfamiliar car a harbinger of doom. The shadows still haunted me, lingering in the corners of my vision, reminding me that I could never let my guard down. One night, while holed up in a seedy motel in the middle of nowhere, I received an unexpected message on my new, supposedly secure email account. It was from Seeker of Truth, 1998. You think you've escaped, but they are always watching. You need to know the truth. Meet me at the old abandoned factory on Route 66. Midnight. Come alone. The thought of another midnight rendezvous filled me with dread, but I couldn't ignore it. Maybe, just maybe, this person had the answers I needed. I packed my things and drove through the night, the miles stretching out endlessly under the dark sky. The factory was a hulking ruin, its broken windows like jagged teeth in the moonlight. The air was thick with decay, and the silence was oppressive. I parked a safe distance away and approached cautiously, my heart pounding with every step. Inside, the factory was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. I navigated the labyrinth, flashlight in hand, until I found myself in a large open space. Standing in the center was a figure, cloaked and hooded. "You came," the figure said, their voice muffled. "I wasn't sure you would." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing off the metal walls. "What do you want from me?" The figure pulled back their hood, revealing a man in his mid-30s with tired eyes and a haunted expression. "My name is Daniel. I was once a member of the Harbinger Society." My grip tightened on the flashlight. "Why should I trust you?" He sighed, the weight of his past evident in his eyes. "Because I'm the one who sent you the invitation. I thought I was doing the right thing, bringing new members into the fold. But I didn't realize the true horror of what the society was until it was too late." "Then why did you stay?" I asked, my anger barely contained. "Fear," he admitted. "They control everything, know everything. But I couldn't live with myself knowing what they were doing, so I broke away. I've been trying to help others ever since." I wanted to believe him, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. "How do I know you're not leading me into another trap?" He reached into his coat slowly, pulling out a small worn journal. "This contains everything I know about the society, their rituals, their leaders, their weaknesses. Take it. Use it to end them." I hesitated, then took the journal. It was heavy with secrets, the pages filled with intricate details and disturbing illustrations. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you have a chance to stop them," he said, his voice filled with a mix of hope and desperation. "I've seen what you're capable of. You confronted the high priest and survived. You can do what I couldn't." Before I could respond, a noise echoed through the factory, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Daniel's eyes widened in fear. "They've found us. You need to go, now." We ran, the shadows closing in around us. I could hear voices, harsh and angry, closing the distance. Daniel shoved me towards a hidden exit. "Go. I'll hold them off." I wanted to argue, to help him, but he pushed me through the door and slammed it shut. I heard the sounds of a struggle behind me, then silence. The guilt was overwhelming, but I couldn't go back. I had to survive. I drove for hours, not daring to stop, until I reached a small town, far from the factory. Exhausted, I found a cheap motel and locked myself in the room, my hands shaking as I opened the journal. The pages were filled with horrors, descriptions of rituals, lists of victims, and detailed maps of the society's strongholds. But one entry stood out. The Harbinger's Eye, an ancient relic said to control the shadows. It is the source of their power. Destroy it, and the society will fall. The eye was kept in the mansion, in a hidden chamber beneath the basement. The very thought of returning there filled me with dread, but I knew what I had to do. This was my chance to end it once and for all. For the next few days, I prepared meticulously. I gathered supplies, planned my route, and studied the journal until I knew every detail by heart. The clock was no longer counting down, but I could feel the pressure of time in every breath, every heartbeat. On the eve of my final confrontation, I wrote a letter detailing everything that had happened. I left it with a trusted friend, with instructions to go to the police if they didn't hear from me in 48 hours. It was a slim hope, but I needed someone to know the truth in case I didn't make it back. The journey back to the mansion was surreal, the familiar road twisting and turning. In the darkness, the mansion stood as imposing as ever, a monument to all the horrors within. I parked the car and approached the front door, the weight of the journal heavy in my backpack. The interior was as decayed as I remembered, but this time I knew where I was going. I moved quickly, every creak of the floorboards echoing through the empty halls. I reached the basement door, took a deep breath, and descended into the darkness. The hidden chamber was just as the journal described, concealed behind a false wall. I found the mechanism and opened it, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the center, on a pedestal, was the Harbinger's Eye. It was a grotesque artifact, a black stone carved with intricate, malevolent symbols. It pulsed with an eerie light, as if alive. I felt its power, its malice seeping into my very soul. With trembling hands, I pulled out the sledgehammer I had brought and approached the eye. The whispers began, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. Embrace it. Accept your fate. I raised the sledgehammer, my heart pounding. The shadows around me seemed to writhe and twist, forming the hooded figures I had come to fear. They reached out to me, their touch cold and clammy, but I focused on the eye. With a primal scream, I brought the sledgehammer down. The eyes shattered, releasing a blinding light and a wave of energy that knocked me off my feet. The whispers turned to screams, then silence. The shadows dissipated, the figures vanishing like smoke. The oppressive weight lifted, and I felt the mansion itself shudder. I knew then that I had done it. The Harbinger Society was no more. I stumbled out of the mansion, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. I had survived, but I knew the scars would never truly heal. The horrors I had faced, the lives lost, they would haunt me forever. But for now, there was peace. I had broken the curse, and with it, the Society's hold on the world. I could finally breathe, finally sleep, without the constant fear of death. As I drove away from Blackwood Manor, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least I had a future, and I vowed to use it to help others, to warn them of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Because no matter how far you run, or how well you hide, the darkness is always watching. But now, at least, I knew how to fight back. Months have passed since I destroyed the Harbinger's Eye and escaped the grip of the Society. Life is starting to return to some semblance of normalcy, though the scars of my ordeal run deep. I've moved to a new city under a different name, hoping to bury the past and rebuild my life. But the shadows of Blackwood Manor haunt me still. I wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, expecting to see hooded figures at the foot of my bed. Every creak, every whisper of the wind sends a shiver down my spine. Paranoia has become a constant companion, and trust is a distant memory. Despite the lingering fear, I found purpose in my survival. I created an anonymous blog, sharing my story and the information from Daniel's journal. I hope that by shedding light on the horrors of the Harbinger Society, I can prevent others from falling into their trap. The response has been overwhelming. Dozens of people have come forward, sharing their own encounters with the Society. Some have seen the countdown clocks, others the hooded figures. A few have even found remnants of the Society's rituals. The realization that the Society's influence reached far beyond Blackwood Manor is both terrifying and galvanizing. One evening, as I was sifting through emails and comments, I received a message from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "We need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. The body of the email was brief. "I know what you did. The Society is not dead. Meet me at the diner on 5th and Main, midnight. Don't come alone." Panic gripped me, but so did determination. I had come too far to back down now. I contacted a few trusted individuals from the blog, those who had shown genuine concern and understanding. We agreed to meet at the diner. Strength in numbers. The diner was a relic from the past, its neon sign flickering in the night. We arrived early, taking seats in a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. The minutes ticked by slowly, the tension palpable. Finally, at midnight, a man walked in. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He scanned the room before approaching our table. "You're the one from the blog," he said, taking a seat. "I'm Robert. I've been tracking the Society for years." I nodded cautiously. "What do you know?" He leaned in, his expression grave. "The Harbinger Society is like a hydra. You cut off one head and another takes its place. They've been operating in the shadows for centuries, adapting and evolving. Your actions at Blackwood Manor were a major blow, but they're regrouping. They won't stop until they reclaim their power." A chill ran down my spine. "So, what do we do?" Robert glanced around, ensuring we weren't overheard. "We form a coalition. There are others like us, survivors and fighters. We gather evidence, expose their operations, and dismantle their power structures one by one. It won't be easy and it will be dangerous, but it's the only way to stop them." The determination in his voice was infectious. The others at the table nodded in agreement. It was clear we couldn't fight this battle alone. Together, we stood a chance. Over the next few weeks, we organized, pooling our resources and information. Robert's knowledge was invaluable, revealing hidden locations and key figures within the Society. We conducted raids, exposed rituals, and saved countless potential victims. Each victory, though small, felt like a step toward reclaiming our lives and restoring some semblance of justice. But the Society fought back. We faced threats, attacks, and betrayals. Members of our coalition were targeted, some disappearing without a trace. The fight was brutal, but our resolve only strengthened. One night, while poring over maps and notes in my apartment, I received another message. This time, it was a video file. With trembling hands, I opened it. The video showed a dimly lit room. In the center was Daniel, tied to a chair, bruised and bloodied. Behind him stood a hooded figure, their face obscured. "You think you can stop us?" the figure hissed, their voice dripping with malice. "We are eternal. For every one of us you defeat, 10 more will rise. Your resistance is futile." The figure stepped forward, lifting Daniel's head. His eyes were filled with pain, but also defiance. "Run," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't let them win." The screen went black. Rage and sorrow surged through me. Daniel had sacrificed himself to give us a chance, and I would not let his death be in vain. I shared the video with our coalition, and the response was immediate. We intensified our efforts, more determined than ever to root out the society and end their reign of terror. Months turned into years, and the battle raged on. We uncovered hidden cells, disrupted rituals, and exposed high-ranking members. The society's influence waned, but the cost was high. Many of us paid the ultimate price, the lives lost in the fight against darkness. But with each victory, hope grew. Survivors found solace in our efforts, and slowly, the fear that had gripped us all began to loosen its hold. The society, though still lurking in the shadows, was weakened, their power fractured. Now, as I sit here, reflecting on this journey, I know the fight is far from over. The Harbinger Society may never be fully eradicated, but we have shown that they can be challenged, that their grip on our fate is not absolute. To those who read this, know that the darkness is real, but so is the light. Stand with us, fight with us, and together we can keep the shadows at bay. The Harbinger Society thrives on fear and secrecy. By shining a light on their horrors, we strip them of their power. Remember, curiosity can be deadly, but knowledge is a weapon. Stay vigilant, stay strong, and never, ever let the darkness win. I encountered a virtual ghost on the dark web. Hey everyone, this is a throwaway account because I don't want this tied back to my real identity. I'm still shaking as I type this, and I'm not even sure I should be sharing this at all. But maybe writing it down will help me process what happened, and maybe it'll serve as a warning to anyone else thinking about exploring the dark web. I've always been fascinated by the macabre and the unknown. Regular horror movies and books don't do it for me anymore. I needed something real, something that would truly scare me. That's when I turned to the dark web. I'd heard all the warnings, read all the horror stories, but I thought I was smart enough to navigate it safely. I was wrong. It started with a late-night browsing session. I was in one of those dark web forums, the kind where you need special invitations to get into. People there shared some pretty messed up stuff, mostly just sick fantasies and urban legends, or so I thought. But one thread caught my eye. Digital seances summon ghosts online. The idea was laughable at first. I mean, ghosts on the internet? Give me a break. But the thread was full of people swearing up and down that it worked, that they'd had real terrifying encounters. Against my better judgment, I decided to give it a try. I clicked the link that was supposed to take me to a special site designed for this purpose. The site was crude, just a black background with white text and a few red accents. There were instructions on how to summon a ghost. It involved typing out a specific phrase at 3:33 a.m. Something about how the time and the phrase together created a digital portal. I laughed it off, but set an alarm on my phone anyway. 3:33 a.m. rolled around, and I typed the phrase, "Show me the one who sees without eyes." My screen flickered, and for a moment, I thought my computer was about to crash. But then the flickering stopped, and there was a new window open on my desktop. It looked like an old chat room, the kind you'd see in the early 2000s. The only message in the chat was from a user named Watcher, and it said, "Welcome." I typed, "Who are you?" Almost immediately, Watcher replied, "I see you." I felt a chill run down my spine. I know it's cliché, but it's true. Something about that simple message unnerved me. I typed back, "What do you mean?" Watcher's response came quickly. "I see you. I'm watching." I glanced around my room, half expecting to see someone standing there. Of course, there was no one. I typed, "How?" "Through the screen," Watcher replied. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know about webcams and hacking. So I covered my webcam with a piece of tape. "Not anymore," I typed, feeling smug. "Doesn't matter," came the reply. "I don't need a camera to see you." I was starting to feel genuinely scared now. I tried to close the chat window, but it wouldn't close. I tried to shut down my computer, but nothing happened. It was like my entire system was frozen, except for the chat. "What do you want?" I typed, my hands trembling. "I want you to see," Watcher replied. "See what?" Instead of a text response, a new window opened on my screen. It was a video, grainy and low quality. At first, I couldn't make out what I was seeing. The camera seemed to be in a dark room, pointed at a wall. Slowly, the camera panned to the left, revealing a figure standing in the corner. It was a man, or at least it had been. His skin was gray and mottled, patches of it hanging loosely from his bones. His eyes were gone, just empty sockets oozing some dark fluid. He was naked, and his body was covered in deep, jagged cuts. Some looked fresh, still seeping blood. Others were old, the flesh around them rotting. The camera zoomed in on his face, and I swear to God, he looked right at me. He opened his mouth, and a hoarse, gurgling voice came through my speakers. "Help me," he said. "Please." I was frozen, unable to look away from the screen. The man reached out a hand, and I saw that his fingers were missing, replaced by jagged stumps. "Help me," he repeated more urgently this time. "What is this?" I typed, my fingers barely able to hit the keys. "Your future," Watcher replied. The video cut out, and for a moment my screen was blissfully black. Then a new message appeared. "You invited me in. Now I'm here. I'll always be here." I finally managed to force my computer to shut down, yanking the power cord out of the wall in my panic. I sat there in the dark, my heart racing, trying to convince myself it was just a sick prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I haven't dared to turn my computer back on since. I'm using an old laptop to write this, but even now, I feel like I'm being watched. My phone glitches out at random. Lights flicker in my house, and I hear whispers when I'm alone. I don't know what I let into my life that night, but I can feel it getting closer. This is just the beginning. I'll update you all when I can, but if you don't hear from me again, stay away from the dark web. It's not worth it. Hey, it's me again. Sorry for the delay. Things have gotten worse. I wasn't sure I'd even survive long enough to write this, but here goes. After that first encounter, I did everything I could to convince myself it was just some elaborate prank. I told myself it was hackers messing with me, or maybe some kind of augmented reality game gone too far. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more the signs piled up that something truly horrific had entered my life. The first real-world sign came the night after I shut down my computer. I was lying in bed, exhausted but unable to sleep, when I heard a faint scratching sound coming from my closet. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was just my imagination, but the sound persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I finally got up and approached the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to find some kind of animal trapped inside, but there was nothing there, just darkness The scratching stopped as soon as I opened the door. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm myself down, when I noticed something on the floor. It was a small piece of paper, old and yellowed, like it had been there for decades. I picked it up and held it under the light. There were just 2 words scrawled on it in shaky, almost childlike handwriting. "Help me." I dropped the paper and stumbled back, my mind racing. How had it gotten there? Was someone in my house? I checked every room, every corner, but I found no sign of an intruder. I barely slept that night, and when I did, I was plagued by nightmares. In one of the dreams, I was back in that dark room from the video. The eyeless man was there, reaching out to me with his mangled stumps. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. And suddenly, I was in his place, my skin peeling away, my fingers disappearing. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. Things only got worse from there. Objects in my house started moving on their own. I'd find chairs pulled out from the table, pictures taken off the walls, and doors open that I knew I'd closed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I'd hear my name being called, in the middle of the night, in that same gurgling voice from the video. I finally broke down and told my best friend, Mark, about what was happening. He's the kind of guy who believes in ghosts and the supernatural, and he took me seriously right away. He came over with a bunch of sage and some crystals, insisting we cleanse the house. I was desperate enough to try anything. We went room to room, burning sage and muttering incantations. I felt ridiculous, but also a glimmer of hope that maybe this would work. But when we got to my bedroom, things took a turn for the worse. As soon as we started burning the sage, the temperature in the room plummeted. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and the lights began to flicker. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of desperate voices. Mark looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "We need to leave," he said, his voice shaking. But before we could move, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The whispers turned into screams, filling the room with a sound so intense it felt like my head was going to split open. Mark dropped the sage and grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the window. We managed to get it open and scrambled out, falling onto the grass below. We didn't stop running until we reached his car. As we drove away, I glanced back at my house and saw a figure standing in the window of my bedroom. It was the eyeless man from the video, watching us with those empty sockets. We drove to Mark's place and stayed up all night, trying to make sense of what had happened. He suggested we contact a medium or a paranormal investigator, someone who might know how to deal with this. I agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The next day, we found a local medium named Sarah who agreed to come over. She was a small, unassuming woman, but there was something about her presence that made me feel a little safer. She spent some time walking through the house, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is bad," she said finally. "You've invited something very dark into your home. It's not a ghost. It's something much worse." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. "It's a demon, a powerful one, and it's attached itself to you." I felt my stomach drop. A demon? How could this be happening? "What can we do?" I asked, desperate for any kind of solution. Sarah shook her head. "I'll do what I can, but it's going to be dangerous. And even if we manage to banish it, there's no guarantee it won't come back. These things are persistent. They feed on fear and despair." We spent the rest of the day preparing for the cleansing ritual. Sarah gave us a list of items to gather: candles, salt, holy water, and instructed us on what to do. As night fell, we set up the ritual space in my living room, drawing a circle of salt around us and lighting the candles. Sarah began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, her voice low and steady. The air grew thick with tension, and the temperature dropped again. The lights flickered, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. I squeezed Mark's hand, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from upstairs. The whispers turned into guttural growls, and the floorboards creaked as if something heavy was moving above us. Sarah's chanting grew more intense, her voice rising to a fever pitch. The growls turned into screams, and the air seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. I felt something cold and clammy brush against my cheek, and I bit back a scream. "Hold on," Sarah shouted over the noise. "It's almost over." But just as she said that, the candles went out, plunging us into darkness. The growls grew deafening, and I felt something wrap around my ankle, pulling me towards the edge of the salt circle. I screamed and kicked, trying to free myself, but the grip tightened. Then just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The candles flickered back to life, and the oppressive darkness lifted. I was lying on the floor, gasping for breath, the grip on my ankle gone. Sarah looked exhausted, but she managed a weak smile. "It's done," she said. "For now." We sat in silence for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. "Will it come back?" Mark asked finally. Sarah nodded. "It might, but you need to be strong. Don't give in to fear. That's what it wants." I thanked her and promised to follow her advice. She left us with some protective charms and a list of things to do to keep the entity at bay. Mark stayed with me for a few more days, and for a while, things seemed to be getting better. But last night, I heard the scratching in the closet again. And this time, when I opened the door, there was a new piece of paper. It simply said, "I'm still here. I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting this. I'm scared, more scared than I've ever been in my life. But I'll keep you all updated as best as I can. And please, if you're reading this, stay away from the dark web. You don't know what kind of horrors are lurking there, waiting for someone foolish enough to let them in. Hey, everyone. It's been a while since my last update. Things have spiraled out of control, and I'm barely holding it together. I hope writing this down will help me stay sane, or at least serve as a warning to anyone else thinking about venturing into the dark web." After the medium, Sarah, left, I did everything she advised. I kept the protective charms on me at all times, spread salt across every threshold, and tried to maintain a positive mindset. Mark stayed with me for a week, and during that time, things were quiet. I thought maybe we'd gotten rid of the entity for good, but deep down, I knew it was just biding its time. A few days after Mark left, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding, and strained to hear more. The noise stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but then the whispering started again, this time louder and more insistent. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, as the whispers grew closer. They seemed to be coming from just outside my bedroom door. I could make out individual words now. My name, repeated over and over, mingled with pleas for help and sinister laughter. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed and threw open the door. ready to confront whatever was out there. But the hallway was empty. The whispers stopped immediately, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt almost tangible. I closed the door and spent the rest of the night huddled under my blankets, too terrified to sleep. The next day, I called Sarah and told her what had happened. She sounded worried, but said there wasn't much more she could do from a distance. She suggested I get out of the house for a while, stay with a friend or family member, and see if that made a difference. I decided to take her advice and went to stay with my parents. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe the entity was tied to the house and couldn't follow me. But that hope was shattered one night when I woke up to find my bedroom door slowly creaking open. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and watched in horror as a shadowy figure slid into the room. It was the eyeless man from the video, his mutilated face twisted into a grotesque grin. He stood at the foot of my bed, his empty socket staring into my soul. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but watch as he reached out a hand towards me. "Help me," he rasped, his voice a sickening blend of desperation and malice. I finally managed to scream, and the figure vanished. My parents rushed into the room, and I told them everything. They were skeptical, of course, but the terror in my eyes must have convinced them I wasn't just having a nightmare. They agreed to let me sleep in their room for the night. The next morning, I went back to my house to gather more of my things. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt a chill wash over me. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and the whispers started up again, louder than ever. I grabbed my stuff as quickly as I could and got out of there. On the drive back to my parents' house, my phone buzzed with a new notification. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood run cold. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize, with the subject line, "I'm still watching." The body of the email contained a single image, a photo of me sleeping in my parents' guest room, taken from just outside the window. I nearly swerved off the road in my panic, pulling over to the side to catch my breath. How could it be watching me even here? I thought I was safe. I called Sarah again, my voice trembling as I told her about the email. She sounded genuinely frightened now. "It's more powerful than I thought," she said. "You need to confront it, find out what it wants, and try to make it leave." "How am I supposed to do that?" I asked, my voice rising in desperation. "There's a ritual," she said hesitantly, "but it's dangerous. You will need to go back to the house and perform it there. It's the only way to banish it for good." I didn't see any other option. I couldn't keep living like this, in constant fear. I agreed to meet Sarah at the house that evening to prepare for the ritual. The hours until then felt like an eternity, but I finally drove back to my house, dreading what was to come. When I arrived, Sarah was already there, setting up the ritual space in the living room. She looked pale and tense, but determined. "This is our best shot," she said, handing me a piece of paper with instructions and incantations. We began the ritual as the sun set, the room filled with the glow of candles and the scent of burning herbs. Sarah chanted in that strange language again, and I followed her instructions to the letter. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into guttural growls, but we pressed on. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, the candles snuffed out by an unseen force. The growls grew louder, and I felt a pressure around my chest, like something was trying to crush me. I struggled to breathe, my vision swimming. "Keep chanting," Sarah shouted, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Don't stop." I forced myself to continue, reciting the incantation over and over. The pressure intensified, and I felt something cold and slimy wrap around my neck. I gasped for air, tears streaming down my face. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, there was a blinding flash of light. The pressure released, and the room fell silent. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Sarah knelt beside me, her face pale but relieved. "It's gone," she said softly. "We did it." I wanted to believe her, but something in my gut told me this wasn't over. I spent the next few days on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and drop it did. Last night, I received another email from the same address. This time, it contained a video. With trembling hands, I opened it and watched as the eyeless man appeared on the screen once more. He was standing in my parents' backyard, his grotesque face inches from the camera. "I'm still here," he whispered, "and I'm coming for you. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm exhausted, terrified, and out of options. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. I'll keep you all updated if I can, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Hey everyone, I'm back, though I'm not sure for how much longer. Things have taken a turn for the worse, and I'm starting to think there's no way out of this. If anyone out there has any suggestions, please, I'm desperate." After receiving that video, I decided I couldn't stay at my parents' house anymore. I didn't want to put them in danger. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, hoping the distance would keep the entity at bay. I was wrong. The first night at the motel was uneventful. I almost started to relax, thinking maybe I'd finally outsmarted this thing. But on the second night, the nightmares returned. I dreamed of the eyeless man again, his grotesque face inches from mine. This time, he wasn't alone. There were others with him, shadowy figures with twisted, contorted bodies, reaching out for me with skeletal hands. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. The room was deathly silent, but I could feel a presence, like something was watching me from the shadows. I turned on every light in the room and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. That's when I noticed it. A new message on my phone. The sender was the same unknown email address, and the subject line simply read, "Look outside." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the email. It contained a single image, a photo of the motel, taken from across the street. In the foreground, barely visible in the darkness, was the silhouette of the eyeless man. I threw my phone across the room, my mind racing. How had he found me? Was there no escape? I didn't sleep at all that night, too terrified to close my eyes. When morning finally came, I checked out of the motel and drove aimlessly, trying to figure out my next move. I decided to go back to my house, thinking maybe I could find something there that would help. As soon as I walked through the door, I felt the oppressive presence return. The air was thick and cold, and the whispers started up almost immediately. But I forced myself to push through the fear and started searching the house for anything that might give me a clue. I found an old journal in the attic, buried under a pile of dusty boxes. It belonged to the previous owner, a man named Henry, who had died under mysterious circumstances. The journal was filled with ramblings about spirits and demons, and one entry caught my eye. March 3rd, 1985. I've done it. I've summoned the Watcher. He promised me power and knowledge beyond my wildest dreams, but I fear I've made a terrible mistake. He's not what he seems. He's darkness incarnate, feeding on fear and suffering. I must find a way to banish him before it's too late. The entries became more frantic after that, detailing Henry's attempts to rid himself of the Watcher. He tried everything: rituals, exorcisms, even burning the house down, but nothing worked. The last entry was dated just a week before his death, March 28th, 1985. The Watcher is everywhere. He's in my dreams, my thoughts. I can feel him closing in. If anyone finds this journal, know that you must not invite him in. He'll never leave. I fear my time is up. God help me. My heart sank as I read the final words. If Henry couldn't get rid of this thing, what chance did I have? I sat down on the attic floor, feeling utterly defeated. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming up the stairs. I froze, my mind racing. There was no one else in the house. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside the attic door. I held my breath, waiting for whatever was out there to reveal itself. The door creaked open, and the temperature in the room plummeted. A shadowy figure stood in the doorway, its eyeless face turned towards me. "Help me," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the wall. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, its skeletal hand reaching out for me. "I want you to see," it said. "See what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Your fate," it replied. Before I could react, the figure lunged at me, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, I was lying on the floor of my bedroom. The house was silent, but the oppressive feeling was stronger than ever. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah, my voice shaking as I told her what had happened. She listened quietly, then sighed. "It's worse than I thought," she said. "I'm coming over. We need to end this once and for all." Sarah arrived an hour later, her face grim. She brought with her a small wooden box filled with various items: candles, herbs, crystals, and a few things I didn't recognize. "We're going to perform one last ritual," she said. "But this one is different. It's dangerous, and it might not work, but it's our only hope." We set up the ritual space in the living room, drawing a large circle of salt on the floor. Sarah placed candles at each cardinal point and lit them, the flames flickering in the cold, oppressive air. She handed me a piece of paper with a new incantation, different from the one we used before. "This is a binding ritual," she explained. "It's designed to trap the entity and prevent it from harming you. But it requires a great deal of energy, and there's a risk it could backfire." I nodded, too scared to ask what she meant by backfire. We began the ritual, chanting in unison as the air grew colder and the whispers returned. The candles flickered wildly, and the shadows seemed to dance around us. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness. The candles went out, and the oppressive presence grew stronger. I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my throat, and I struggled to breathe. Sarah's voice rose above the noise, her chanting growing more intense. The pressure around my throat intensified, and I felt myself being lifted off the ground. I gasped for air, my vision swimming. Just as I thought I was going to pass out, there was a blinding flash of light, and I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. The candles flickered back to life, and the oppressive presence lifted. I looked up to see Sarah lying on the floor, her eyes closed. I crawled over to her, my heart racing. "Sarah!" I shouted, shaking her gently. She opened her eyes slowly, a weak smile on her face. "We did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's bound." I helped her sit up, relief washing over me. "Is it over?" I asked. "For now," she replied. "But you need to be careful. The binding will hold, but only if you stay strong. Don't give in to fear. That's what he feeds on." I thanked her and promised to follow her advice. She left me with some protective charms and a list of things to do to keep the entity at bay. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. But last night, I received another email. This time, there was no subject line, just a single image. It was a photo of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. In the background, I could see the eyeless man, his grotesque face twisted into a sinister grin. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm exhausted, terrified, and out of options. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. I'll keep you all updated if I can, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Hey everyone, this will probably be my last update. I don't know how this will end, but I need to get it all down while I still can. Things have escalated to a point where I'm not sure if I'll make it through the night. If you're reading this, consider it a final warning. After receiving that last email, I knew I had to act fast. The eyeless man was getting bolder, more aggressive. I called Sarah again, my voice barely steady as I explained what had happened. She agreed to come over one last time, but I could hear the fear in her voice. She knew, just as I did, that we were running out of time. Sarah arrived that evening, looking more determined than ever. She brought with her a small black book filled with ancient rituals and incantations. "This is our last chance," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying her fear. "We're going to perform a banishment ritual. It's risky, and it might not work, but it's all we have left." We set up the ritual space in the basement, the darkest part of the house. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and the temperature dropped as soon as we stepped inside. We drew a large circle of salt on the floor and placed candles at each point. Sarah handed me a piece of paper with the incantation written on it. "This ritual requires both of us to chant," she explained. "We need to focus all our energy on banishing this entity. No matter what happens, don't stop chanting." I nodded, my hands shaking as I took the paper. We began the ritual, our voices rising in unison as we chanted the ancient words. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist around us, and the candles flickered wildly. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness. The candles went out, and the oppressive presence grew stronger. I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my throat, and I struggled to breathe. Sarah's chanting grew more intense, her voice rising above the noise. The pressure around my throat intensified, and I felt myself being lifted off the ground. I gasped for air, my vision swimming. Just as I thought I was going to pass out, there was a blinding flash of light, and I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. The candles flickered back to life, and the oppressive presence lifted. I looked up to see Sarah lying on the floor, her eyes closed. I crawled over to her, my heart racing. "Sarah!" I shouted, shaking her gently. She opened her eyes, slowly, a weak smile on her face. "We did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's gone." I helped her sit up, relief washing over me. "Is it over?" I asked. "For now," she replied. "But you need to be careful. The banishment will hold, but only if you stay strong. Don't give in to fear. That's what he feeds on. I thanked her and promised to follow her advice. She left me with some protective charms and a list of things to do to keep the entity at bay. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. But last night, I received another email. This time, there was no subject line, just a single image. It was a photo of me, taken from outside my bedroom window. In the background, I could see the eyeless man, his grotesque face twisted into a sinister grin. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm exhausted, terrified, and out of options. If anyone has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. I'll keep you all updated if I can, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. As I write this, I can hear the whispers growing louder. They're coming from every corner of the house, echoing in my mind. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. If this is the end, I want you all to know that I tried. I fought as hard as I could, but sometimes the darkness is just too strong. The whispers are deafening now, and I can see the shadows moving closer. The eyeless man is here, standing at the edge of the circle of salt. His twisted grin is the last thing I see as the darkness closes in. If you're reading this, please don't make the same mistake I did. Stay away from the dark web. You don't know what kind of horrors are lurking there, waiting for someone foolish enough to let them in. This is my final warning. Be careful. Stay safe. And whatever you do, don't invite the darkness in.